My mother robbed me blind after my grandfather died, then told me to stand on my own 2 feet. This is a real story of family betrayal, calculated revenge, and the kind of justice that doesn't shout, it waits. I stood in the back of the auction hall, watching my mother weep as the gavel fell on the estate she had stolen from me 10 years ago. She thought forging my signature to take my grandfather's inheritance would secure her lavish lifestyle forever, but she didn't realize she was just fueling the fire that would eventually burn her world to the ground. My name is Avery Walker. Most people assume that family loyalty is an unbreakable bond, a tether that keeps you grounded even when the rest of the world spins out of control. For the first 19 years of my life, I believed that too. I believed that mothers were supposed to be protectors, nurturers, the people who put you first no matter the cost. But I learned the hard way that for some people, family is nothing more than a resource to be mined, exploited, and discarded once it no longer serves a purpose. My mother, Lydia, was a master of extraction. She didn't view people as human beings with feelings or rights. She viewed them as stepping stones to the lifestyle she believed she was owed by the universe. To understand why I stood in that auction hall with a check in my pocket and ice in my veins, you have to understand the man who built the house and the man who raised me, my grandfather, Arthur. He wasn't just a grandfather to me, he was my father figure, my mentor, and my best friend. My biological father had left before I was old enough to form memories, and Lydia was always around physically, but emotionally, she was as distant as a star in a different galaxy. She was beautiful, charming when she needed to be, and perpetually dissatisfied with everything she had. Arthur was different. He was a man of the earth, a self-made contractor who had built his wealth through calloused hands and honest work. He lived in a sprawling, beautiful estate on the edge of the city, a house he had designed and built himself. It was a place of warmth, smelling of cedar and old books, a sanctuary where I spent every weekend, and eventually where I moved in full-time when Lydia decided parenting was interfering with her social calendar. By the time I was 18, Arthur's health began to decline. It wasn't a sudden event, but a slow, heartbreaking erosion. It started with forgetfulness, then mobility issues, and finally a diagnosis that required round-the-clock care. The doctors suggested a facility, a sterile place where he would be just another number. I refused. I was just finishing high school, preparing for university, but I knew I couldn't leave him. I deferred my acceptance to a prestigious business program, moved my things into the guest room permanently, and became his primary caregiver. For 2 years, my life was a cycle of medication schedules, doctor's appointments, and late-night conversations when the pain kept him awake. It was exhausting, grueling work that aged me beyond my years, but I don't regret a single second of it. During those long nights, Arthur would talk to me about his life, his regrets, and his hopes for me. He knew Lydia was irresponsible with money. He knew she saw him as a walking ATM. One rainy Tuesday, about 6 months before he passed, he sat me down in his study. His hands were shaking as he pulled a leather binder from his desk. He showed me the documents. It was a trust, set up in my name. It included the deed to the estate and a substantial sum of money, enough to cover my education, start the business I had always dreamed of, and maintain the house for decades. He looked me in the eye, his gaze intense and lucid, and told me that he had structured it this way because he knew if he left it to Lydia, it would be gone in 5 years. He wanted to secure my future. He wanted to reward the only person who had ever truly loved him without an agenda. I cried, not because of the money, but because he saw me. He valued me. Contrast this with Lydia. During those 2 years of caregiving, she visited perhaps once a month. She would breeze in wearing designer clothes she couldn't afford, complain about the smell of medicine, ask Arthur for a loan to cover some emergency that was usually a disguised shopping spree, and then leave. She treated me like the hired help. She would critique my appearance, telling me I looked tired and frumpy, ignoring the fact that I was sleeping 4 hours a night to keep her father alive. She saw my sacrifice not as an act of love, but as a convenience that saved her the cost of a nursing home. The end came quietly. Arthur passed away in his sleep, in the house he built, knowing he was loved. I was 20 years old, exhausted, grief-stricken, and entirely unprepared for the shark that was circling the water. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, gaslighting burn that started the day after the funeral. I was a wreck. I had lost my anchor. Lydia, however, was energized. She moved into the estate the very next day, ostensibly to help me sort through things, but looking back, I see she was planting her flag. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of cold coffee when she slid a stack of papers in front of me. She told me they were standard legal forms for the cremation, transfer of utilities, and insurance processing. She said the lawyers were overwhelmed and needed these signed immediately to avoid penalties. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. She had just lost her father. I assumed we were sharing the same grief. I didn't read the fine print. I was 20, heartbroken, and assumed that legal documents were just bureaucratic hurdles we had to jump over together. I signed page after page, my hand trembling, just wanting it to be over so I could go back to bed and cry. Weeks passed. I started talking about university again. I told Lydia I needed to contact the executor of the estate to access the trust fund for my tuition deposit. Lydia waved me off, telling me not to worry, that probate was complicated and took time. She said she would handle the lawyers so I could focus on healing. Then the changes started. First, it was the car. Lydia rolled up the driveway in a brand new luxury SUV, the kind that costs more than most people make in 2 years. When I asked how she afforded it, she vaguely mentioned an insurance payout. Then contractors appeared. They weren't fixing the roof or maintaining the structure. They were ripping out Arthur's library, his favorite room, to turn it into a walk-in closet and dressing room for Lydia. I confronted her. I stood in the hallway, covered in dust from the construction, and asked what she was doing. I told her the house was part of my trust, and she couldn't just renovate it without discussing it. She laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that I can still hear if I close my eyes. She looked at me with a pitying expression, like I was a confused child. She told me to stop being so dramatic and territorial. She said, "It's family money, Avery. It's all the same pot." The unease in my gut turned to nausea. I went to the bank the next morning. I asked to speak to the manager who had handled Arthur's accounts for years. When I sat in his office and asked for the status of the trust, he looked confused. He clicked around on his computer, frowned, and turned the screen toward me. The accounts were empty. The trust had been dissolved. The house title had been transferred. I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked how this was possible. He pulled up the digital records. There, on the screen, were the documents: a modification to the trust, a deed transfer, a withdrawal authorization. All of them bore the signature of Arthur Walker, which looked shaky but plausible, and below it, a witness signature, mine, and another document, a waiver of claim signed by me, the papers I had signed at the kitchen table. She hadn't just forged my signature on new documents, she had tricked me into signing away my rights under the guise of funeral arrangements. She had legally maneuvered the entire estate into her name, using my grief-blinded compliance as the weapon. I drove home in a daze. When I walked into the house, Lydia was in the living room, drinking champagne with a group of friends I didn't recognize. She was holding court, acting the part of the wealthy heiress she had always pretended to be. I stopped the music. I screamed at everyone to get out. When we were finally alone, the mask fell off completely. I threw the bank statements on the floor and demanded the truth. I expected her to deny it, or to cry, or to make excuses. She didn't. She took a sip of her champagne, looked me dead in the eye, and delivered the lines that would fuel my ambition for the next decade. "I needed it more than you, Avery," she said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "You're young. You have your whole life to work. You can get loans for school. You can get a job. I gave up my life to raise you. I deserve this. My father never appreciated me, never gave me what I was worth. This is just back pay." I stood there, shaking. "You stole my future. Grandpa left that for my education, for my business." She sneered. Your little business ideas? Please, you are going to waste it. I'm doing you a favor. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet instead of waiting for a handout. Besides, I've already liquidated the main investment accounts. It's done. Then came the final blow. She told me I had a week to move out. She said my negative energy was ruining her healing process, and she needed the space for her new lifestyle. I left that night with 2 suitcases and a heart turned to stone. The next few years were a blur of desperation and grinding poverty. I was homeless for 3 weeks, sleeping in my car in Walmart parking lots, using wet wipes to bathe because I was too proud to ask friends for help and too broke to afford a motel. I refused to be a victim. I refused to let her win. Every time I felt like giving up, I heard her voice saying, "You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." I took that advice, but not in the way she intended. I got a job as a waitress at a diner that stayed open 24 hours. I took the graveyard shift because it paid $1 more an hour. During the day, I worked as a receptionist at a logistics firm. On weekends, I cleaned houses. I worked 18-hour days. I ate peanut butter sandwiches and ramen. I saved every single penny that didn't go to rent for a tiny studio apartment that smelled like mildew. I didn't go to university. I couldn't afford it. Instead, I educated myself. I checked out books on business management, supply chain logistics, and real estate from the public library. I utilized the internet to learn coding and accounting. I treated my survival like a business project. 2 years after the betrayal, I launched my company. It started small, a specialized courier service for high-value legal and medical documents. I was the CEO, the driver, the dispatcher, and the janitor. I didn't sleep. I didn't date. I didn't take vacations. I poured every ounce of my energy into building something that no one could take away from me. While I was climbing the mountain, Lydia was sliding down the other side. Through the grapevine of old family friends and social media, I kept tabs on her. It went exactly as Arthur had predicted. Without the discipline to manage wealth, the money began to evaporate. Lydia didn't just spend, she hemorrhaged cash. She went on 5-star vacations to Europe, bought cars she crashed or grew bored of, and invested in get-rich-quick schemes proposed by con artists who saw her coming from a mile away. She surrounded herself with sycophants who drank her expensive wine and disappeared the moment the credit cards started getting declined. By year 5, the rumors changed. She was selling off Arthur's antique furniture. She was taking out second and third mortgages on the estate. She was seen at local casinos looking disheveled, chasing losses. Meanwhile, my business had exploded. My reputation for reliability secured contracts with major hospitals and law firms across the state. I expanded into freight logistics. I hired staff. I moved out of the mildew apartment into a condo downtown. I bought a decent car. I started investing. I never reached out to her. I never answered the few drunk voicemails she left me on Christmas or my birthday, voicemails that always started with "I miss you" and ended with subtle hints about how expensive heating oil was. I deleted them without listening to the end. I wasn't ready. I was biding my time. Around the 9-year mark, the inevitable happened. I received a notification from a real estate alert I had set up years ago, the address of Arthur's estate. It wasn't just for sale, it was listed as a foreclosure auction. The bank had finally come to collect. Lydia had defaulted on the mortgages. She was being evicted. I sat in my office, looking at the listing on my monitor. The pictures were heartbreaking. The lawn was overgrown, the siding was dirty, the windows looked dark and uninviting. But the bones of the house, the structure Arthur had built with his own hands, were still there. I called my CFO. I told him to liquidate some assets. I told him I needed a cashier's check for a very specific, very large amount. He asked if I was buying a competitor. I told him, no, I'm buying back my history. That brings us back to the auction hall. It was a cold morning. The room was filled with investors, house flippers, and predatory developers looking to bulldoze the property and put up condos. And there, in the back corner, was Lydia. She looked 20 years older than when I last saw her. Her designer coat was frayed at the cuffs. Her hair was dyed a harsh, cheap yellow. She was crying, pleading with a man in a suit, presumably her lawyer or a bank representative, who looked thoroughly done with her. I wore a hat and sunglasses, standing in the shadows. I didn't want her to see me. Not yet. The bidding started. The opening price was low, reflecting the poor condition of the property. The flippers jumped in. The price climbed steadily. Lydia sobbed louder with every increment, watching her status slip away. 300,000, the auctioneer called. 350, 400. The developers were getting aggressive. They didn't care about the house. They wanted the land. I felt a surge of protective anger. They weren't going to tear down what Arthur built. When the bidding stalled at 600,000, the room went quiet. The auctioneer raised his gavel. Going once, I stepped forward, removing my sunglasses. 800,000. The room gasped. It was an aggressive jump, a knockout bid designed to silence the room. Heads turned. The developers whispered to each other and shook their heads. It was too high for a teardown. Lydia stopped crying. She squinted across the room, her eyes widening as she recognized me. I saw the shock register, followed immediately by a dawn of hope. She thought I was there to save her. She thought the prodigal daughter had returned to rescue the mother. 800,000 going once, going twice, sold to the lady in the black coat. The gavel slammed down. It sounded like a gunshot. I walked to the front to sign the papers. I could feel Lydia's eyes boring into my back. As soon as the transaction was finalized, she rushed over. She ignored the security guard trying to herd the crowd out. "Avery! Oh my God, Avery!" she cried out, her voice cracking with a mixture of relief and hysteria. She tried to hug me. I stepped back, raising a hand to stop her. "Don't." She froze, looking confused. "Avery, baby, you did it! You saved the house! I knew you would! I knew you wouldn't let them take it from us. It's been so hard, you have no idea. The bank, these people, they're vultures. But we can fix it. I can move back into the master suite, and you can take the guest wing, and—" I cut her off. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the trembling fear I had felt 10 years ago. "Lydia, stop." She blinked. "What? What do you mean?" "I didn't buy this house for us," I said, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "I bought this house for me, and for the memory of the man you disrespected." Her face fell. "But I'm your mother. You can't just throw me out. I have nowhere to go. I'm bankrupt, Avery. They took everything." "They didn't take it," I corrected her. "You spent it. You stole my inheritance, you forged my signature, and you told me I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. You were right, I did, and now you need to do the same." "You ungrateful brat," she shrieked, the mask slipping again. "I gave you life. You owe me this house." "I owe you nothing," I said, leaning in close. "You took my education. You took my safety net. You took 10 years of my life that I spent scrubbing floors and driving trucks to build what I have. This house belongs to me now, legally, morally, and you are trespassing." I turned to the police officer standing near the exit. "Officer, this woman is harassing me. I'd like her removed from the premises." Lydia began to scream as she was escorted out. She cursed me, she cursed Arthur, she cursed the world. I watched her go, feeling a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy, it wasn't malice. It was simply the release of a heavy weight I had been carrying for a decade. The scales were balanced. The aftermath was swift and brutal for her, but healing for me. I hired a team to clean out the house. We filled 5 dumpsters with the trash she had accumulated, broken furniture, cheap decorations, piles of unpaid bills. But beneath the filth, Arthur's house was still there. The cedar beams were strong, the foundation was solid. I didn't move in, I couldn't. Too many ghosts. Instead, I stayed true to the promise I made to myself. I spent the next year renovating the estate, restoring it to exactly how it looked when Arthur was alive, but with a new purpose, I filed the paperwork to establish a nonprofit organization. Today, the Arthur Walker Foundation is a transitional housing and resource center for young women who have survived financial abuse and domestic betrayal. We provide housing, legal aid, financial literacy courses, and business grants. The library, the one Lydia turned into a closet, has been restored. It is now a classroom where young women learn how to read contracts, how to invest, and how to protect themselves from people like my mother. As for Lydia, the last I heard, she was living in a state-subsidized apartment on the other side of town. She tells anyone who will listen that her ungrateful daughter stole her mansion. She plays the victim to an audience that grows smaller every day. She has tried to sue me twice. Both times the cases were dismissed with prejudice because I had the original bank records of her forgery, which I finally handed over to the authorities. She avoided prison due to her age and mental state, but she is permanently blacklisted from financial institutions and lives on a fixed government stipend. I visit the house every Sunday. I walk through the garden Arthur planted. I listen to the laughter of the women who are rebuilding their lives in the safety of his walls. My mother stole my money. She stole my trust. She tried to steal my future. But she couldn't steal my spirit, and she certainly couldn't steal the legacy of the man who actually mattered. I bought the house back, not to possess it, but to ensure that the greed that destroyed our family would die with her, while the generosity that defined my grandfather would live on forever. And that is the best investment I ever made. Some families teach loyalty, others teach survival. If stories of family drama, stolen futures, and earned justice speak to you, subscribe.